So keep that in mind. I think that a person who fishes Truman Lake needs to be really cognizant of what the water release is doing and what your water level is.
Mhm. So, with that said, I know we touched on your thoughts on the lakes as well, but if someone puts a gun to your head and says, "Dave, pick a lake. Which one's gonna win it?" What would you say?
Oh, Tyler, the whole thing that I just said makes me, I hate it. I hate it,
Yeah.
but I've got to give the nod. I've got, I kind of got to give the nod to Lake of the Ozarks just for the simple fact of the water stability.
Hmm.
It hasn't been up here and then coming down to here. It's right here. It's just fluctuated a little bit. Yeah, back in the Toyota series, they really had it low because they were selling power and they were doing everything else. But now it's come up and it's somewhere in that 657, 658 range, somewhere in that area. It's been really pretty consistent. And I think as consistent as that is, that stability makes those big ones feel comfortable.
Right.
Like I talked about, let's just say, okay, you're a bass and there's your food has come up here shallow. And that's the other thing I just want to touch on just a second is that just because the water comes up early in the year, and all of us that have fished Truman forever, that it's kind of a kiss of death. We're all like, oh no. Number one, just because it spreads out so far, but number two, those bass don't necessarily just move right up into it. A bass isn't going to go get in the bush 30 yards up on the bank on a flat bank just because their food has to be there.
Hmm.
So until their food moves into this flooded stuff, those bass aren't going to be in it. But as soon as their food goes there, they're there. And lots of times they're there until their food leaves.
Hmm.
So even though they're running that water, they won't feel comfortable to sit and spawn, but they'll possibly still be up there in a shallow bush, but there's probably shad or some type of forage that's up there around because they won't just be there just to throw a party.
Yeah.
They're there to feed and use that cover as protection.
Hmm. Now, how maybe water temperature becomes more into play on what the bait is doing. Does the water running through the dam and the dropping water on Truman, how does that impact the way bait moves around? Does it really matter, or is it mostly water temperature that affects if that bait's going to get up in some of that flooded stuff?
Well, lots of times when the fresh water comes in, it brings lots of different things in as the runoff comes in, and some of those things are what shad feed on.
Hmm.
And lots of times in the middle of these ditches or guts, and you've got fresh water coming in, those big gizzard shad will get in the middle of those guts. And early in the year, that's kind of been almost like a secret thing to look for. Lots of guys didn't know about it, but you know, those big fish react to those great big gizzard shad. And if those gizzard shad get in those guts and you have fresh water coming in, those, and I'm talking about two different mindsets. I'm talking about a fish that is not wanting to spawn yet because a fish isn't going to leave their nest to come out here to eat gizzard shad because the fresh water's coming in. Once they commit and they sit, they're there. The only thing that really makes them leave that nest is if the Corps of Engineers sucks the water off of
Hmm.
them. Then they leave. Then they abandon it. Then they get off there. So it's as far as the release of water, yes, it can draw those shad off of the bank. There's no doubt. If like what I was talking about, if it gets too low, if they're there, but once that water kind of stops coming in and there's all the microorganisms that the shad feed on and everything else, are no longer being flushed into the lake, then they kind of move, and they'll actually move their way out. If late in the day, if it's been a sunny day and there's a few bushes over here on this flat, yeah, those shad may get up there and sun and flick and pop and do crazy things that shad do, and there'll be bass somewhere around that. I promise you, there's no doubt, because I can't tell you how many times late in the day on a sunny day early in the year that all of a sudden you see that happening. You go over there and you throw a spinner bait, or you throw a black market balsa, and all of a sudden you catch a 5 or 6 or 7 pounder. That's a deal. It really is. So, I just think that cognizant, uh, do your due diligence, keep up with the water level, keep up with the forecast. All these are checklist things that are just second nature to a lot of us, because gosh, I've traveled all over the United States fishing tournaments, and you got to know these things. Well, somebody says, what's your biggest piece of advice about bass fishing? Or, hey, I want to get into tournaments. Hey, I want to do good in tournaments. Hey, what do you think? It's just like, Tyler, if you want to kill a big deer, you have to know what that deer is doing, don't you? You have to know the critter that you're chasing. And that's why I respond all the time. I was like, know what a bass does, know what a bass reacts to, know what a bass eats, know what the water temperature is, that he does this, that he does this. So it's all kind of it's all a big picture. There are all these pieces of the puzzle that you kind of put together.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell everyone. I mean, if it was easy, everybody in the world would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But those big fish do certain things. They do different things than a 3 pounder. They do different things. And whenever I say a big fish, I'm talking about a 7, 8, 9 pounder. I'm talking about a big one. Lots of people think big ones are 5 pounders, and to some people they are, and that's great. But when I'm talking about a big one, in order for you to win $100,000, that's what I'm talking about. A 7 to 9 pounder is the window. So you have to figure out what that big one does, what he wants, what she wants. Where is she in the ecological cycle as far as the reproduction part of what a fish does, and it's a little bit more than to plan all of it out. Now, trust me, I've been with plenty of people who are just fishy. They are just fishy. They're like, oh, I don't need to put new line on. And they throw it out there, make this terrible cast. And before the lure hits the water, a 5 pounders, shooting off this stump to bite the bait. It's like, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So make sure you bring your horseshoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You definitely want a horseshoe in your back pocket fishing for $100,000.
Yeah.